Hello, welcome back to Leading Our Own Way. I hope you guys are subscribing because today's segment with Rae Bonney, we examine the complex relationship between trauma and health, exploring various coping mechanisms. And I just struggle to say that word, mechanisms. And the coping mechanisms and, paths to healing. It's really, really important stuff. So make sure you are staying tuned for today. But if you've missed part 1 and 2, make sure you subscribe and go back and watch that first. Tomorrow, may I add, Thursday, we're going to hear all about Rae's journey from corporate recruitment to mental health advocate. So stay tuned and make sure you come back. Cheers and enjoy with Rae Bonney. In school, I want the children to struggle with safety, that hardiness. If a kid asks me, I don't know where a pencil is, I've lost my pencil. Well, what do you think you need to do then? Oh, I need to look for the pencil. Well, there you go. You've just wasted 10 seconds of your life asking me that question. I want them to struggle in a safe way. I don't feel like we allow children to struggle anymore. I don't know if that's even the right word, but, let them go and find something they've lost. Let them go and fix the problem.
It's curiosity. It's just be curious.
Yeah.
Where's my pencil? Where could I look? Where could it have gone?
Yeah.
And that's, curiosity. I think that that's something that is a real driver of, healthy humans. Gratitude, curiosity, kindness, care, they're all kind of within us.
Absolutely.
And, emerging those in your kids costs nothing at all. And, I think about some of my male role models, whilst I didn't have them close by when I was little, I did have some growing up. My uncle John, he was a remarkable man, and he grew up, in Gippsland here in Victoria. And, his experience of domestic violence was from his sister. And their mother had died, who was my grandmother, who I never knew, but she'd passed on. So my auntie was charged with raising the kids. And, she was very violent. And he ended up leaving and moving up to Darwin and living up in the territory for his whole life to get away from that. And, I was very close with him and, very fortunate that he would fly me and the kids up to Darwin every year. And, we'd go and be in the outback, and my kids got to experience the territory like nothing else. So grateful to my Uncle John, who unfortunately passed away in 2018. But, he would still, I remember sitting with him, not long before he died, he still cried about how his sister would just beat him till he bled. And, that really sits with me, that a man in his 70s could still be crying about that. It's so real. And we live in a society that doesn't support that. It doesn't want to hear that, especially from a man like that who, is very responsible for, digging, gas pipelines up the middle of Australia. This man's made of leather. He could never be upset about being beaten up by a girl.
Yeah. I align with that because my journey in my third year of being in Australia, I won a National Teacher of the Year award. I think I might have told you this on the pre-chat, but I was shortly after that was bullied by a woman, and but I'd done everything in my life that would come across as building up confidence, playing basketball on the other side of the world, traveling the world, backpacking, being on my own, making decisions myself, being able to do things for myself, seeing these incredible things all over the world. I've been a financial advisor. I've achieved that award. I've done all of these things, bucket list things I want to do for New Year, and I wanted to be there then, and I've always chased everything I've always wanted to, and I've failed over and over and over again, and I believe that's why I've been successful in the things I've wanted to achieve, and I've got up every single time. But when I was being bullied by a woman, I lost everything about myself. I became the shell of a man. My partner would cry on the couch, on the phone to her mum, not knowing what to do to help me and support me. I would walk around with the smile. If any of my colleagues was listening to this, they would probably go, "There was nothing wrong with you. You were fine." But it's because I walked around with a smile on my face, and inside I was really ripped apart. And I was throwing up before work most mornings. At the time, I thought I was just sick. I didn't know, about fight and flight. I didn't know what was happening to my organs. I wasn't listening to my body because I didn't know how to listen to my body. And I don't even know where I'm going with that, to be honest. But I just remember that I'd lost. Everyone used to call me Andy White. Oh, Andy White's just being Andy White, and I lost all sense of Andy White, and only really Andy White's coming back into my body in the last 2 to 3 years, because I'd like to say I've worked at myself at a cellular level, because I nearly died through sepsis in the organ from another chronic situation I was in, not bullying, but just another work toxic environment. And that's why I've just taken myself out. And I feel like I'm recognizing now traumatic situations. And I remember you saying in our pre-chat that you're now really quite good at recognizing, or you have always been quite good at recognizing since a young age, of how to take yourself out of traumatic situations. What traumatic situations were you in as a young, not going into detail, but I know you've said about feeling unsafe when you were a child. How did you get so good at recognizing to take yourself out? It was a long question, I'm sorry. But yeah, how do you, I went on then because I got emotional about myself as well, and I'm emotional and connecting with you. But how did you recognize to take yourself out of those situations at such a young age? Because I didn't until I was older.
Oh, I don't know if I did.
Okay.
But I guess, the whole big bit that we're missing about my trajectory is what got me from there to here.
And that's what I want to fill in, yeah.
And you just mentioned then about your own experience of the physical impact from trauma, and a lot of people just don't recognize that. So, as a young child, being in that state of trauma all the time, I held my grief and my stress and, in my stomach. And, anyone that's listening in, you can sort of identify in your body, sort of when you get stressed or tense, we might grip our hands, or we might feel it in our head or our chest or our neck. I held all mine in my stomach. So by the time I got into my, very early 30s, my whole entire large intestine had stopped working. It was always a problem, but by then it just stopped working as a result of that trauma, and I had to have the whole thing removed. And, it was I fortunately had a very good surgeon and very good healthcare here in Australia, and it works perfectly well without a large intestine. But if I go back to you saying, how did I know how to keep myself away from trauma? I didn't. My whole life, I started this podcast by disclosing, I'm going through an episode of anxiety at the moment, and how I managed that for most of my life was with alcohol. Alcohol was amazingly effective for me in terms of managing all of that trauma and all of that grief. When it would come up for me, I would just have wine, and then it would go away. So part of me is kind of, it might sound very counterintuitive to people, but alcohol probably saved my life, in that it was my best friend, and enabled me to actually live, because without it, I don't think I would be here. Suicidal thoughts were always part of my life. They still are now. However, never reached the point that they did when I was younger, because, I take such great care of myself. Doesn't mean the thought doesn't sit there. And people, when I disclose that, go, oh my God, I didn't know that about you. And it's like, whoa back, listen to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the thoughts there, very unlikely to happen because of the insights and because of the care I take with myself, including the fact that I don't drink alcohol at all now. And I have to sit with all of those really, really sharp feelings. But, work for me has always been something that I have lots and lots of energy for. I think I'm very grateful that I was born with kind of a brain and a drive and a stamina that allows me to colour outside the lines, be pretty unconventional in everything I do, and have no fear in pushing through. So, in my very early years of work, I started working at a bookshop when I was when I'd left school, and it was an educational book shop. And very fortunately, it was a great place of learning for me, because leaving school, I did nothing at school. I could barely string a sentence together, and still to this day, I can't find words because they just don't exist. I didn't learn them in school. I've spent a lot of time reading the dictionary, when I was younger, but still I will come up against blockages that go, oh, I don't know the word for that. But
Yeah.
that was really great to sort of get, they were the first people in this very small family business that gave me an environment where I was respected, I had objective, I had purpose. Marge, the personnel lady, she was the bookkeeper. She let me live with her. So I lived with her for a couple of years. And I also met my boyfriend there, who became my husband later, early in life, and his family, amazing people. Um, his dad was a doctor. His mother was, they had family traditions, and they were very well-raised people, who were a very good community people, very good citizens of the world, who introduced me to so many beautiful ways of living. And I still carry on a lot of what I learned from them about how I wanted to be. But really, they were just emerging who I already was, because the child that was living in the very unsafe environment was really just a version of adapting to safety. So,
Yeah.
I really felt the real me starting to emerge, and my style and my approach to things, which, as I said, is pretty unconventional, was coming along. So I was only at the bookshop for a few years before they said, we're going to sack you unless you leave, because you're capable of so much more than this. And back then, I looked in the newspaper, and there was a job in the paper for a typist at an investment bank in the city. And it was kind of a similar feeling to being at the Order of Australia ceremony the other day. I was way out of my depth, going to this interview. It was 425 Collins Street, in this very beautiful building. And back then, you didn't get tested for anything. So I couldn't type, by the way, but I'm going for a job as a typist. And I was all dressed up, and somehow I got the job. So I was going to be the typist to the secretary to the chief economist of this very fancy investment bank. Got the job, couldn't type, so I pretended to type really fast. So when any of the economists would walk past, I just go like this on my typewriter, just to pretend I was typing. And but I would work extraordinary hours to get out press releases and things like that. And one day an economist stopped. He said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "You can't type, can you?" I went, "Oh no." But they really liked me by that stage, because I was doing other good things. So they sent me on a typing course, and to this day I can still touch type. So but anyway, that was an amazing job, in that the chief economist, I was exposed to, people in my office, like, the treasurer of Australia, Paul Keating was in my office every day, not every day, but a lot. Really important people, where I had to grow up really fast, and also present myself in a way that was, appropriate. And the chief economist, his assistants kept on leaving, because he was a very difficult man. And one day, the next one had left, and I said, "I can do this job." I'd been there for about 18 months, and I think I was about 17 at the time. And they said, "No, you can't have that job, because you're just not qualified." And anyway, they couldn't fill the role, and I made them a deal. I said, "Let me do this job until you find somebody, and if I can prove to you that I can do this job really well, then you've got to pay me the money that's commensurate with the job." Anyway, I got the job, and I stayed with him for 7 years. We moved from the investment bank, we moved to National Mutual Royal Bank, and then we ended up at the Australian Bankers Association. And I learned so much in that 7 years, about so much to do with the economy, and how to write, how to speak, how to do so many things. It was a remarkable journey, that
And you were
showed me.
still pretty young there, 24 when you'd finished then.
No, I was Um,
17, 7 years. That was still.
I started by 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20, and I left when I was 21, so that was only 5 years.
Oh.
So got my maths wrong. Thank you for doing that very quick addition.
Well, that's even younger than 21. You've
That
grown
was
up.
really
You
good.
have
Oh, because
grown
I
up
was really
fast.
excited. I was studying to be an actress, so I always wanted to be on stage.
Yeah.
And so I'd been going to acting school, and I just thought, no, I'm going to do this. And so I left, and that was when we had the recession that needed to happen. And so the bottom fell out of the entertainment industry here in Australia. So I ended up getting a temporary position at ICI, which is Industrial Chemical Industries. I think they were Imperial Chemical Industries, which is now Orica. So a big chemical company, and I got a job there in their crop care area in marketing. And before long, I'm running the show there, and I was given $1 million budget to take a group of farmers up to the Hyatt Regency in Coolum, which hadn't even been finished being built then. That was in Queensland, and that I lost a lot of weight during that time because it was really stressful. This is back again in the early 90s where travel was, wasn't easy to coordinate that many people traveling all over Australia. But at that stage, I did, I learned a lot there as well, and it was an amazing company. Learned a lot about marketing. Had an affair with my boss, which I'd been recently married to the boy I met in the bookshop.
Because that was quite a wealthy family, wasn't it, that you were married into?
Well, I don't say very wealthy, but they did well.
Yeah.
But that wasn't relevant, really.
No, because you painted the picture that there was distinguished and polished, and I assumed that went with it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, probably not the money side of things.
Yeah.
They were just really good people.
Yeah.
And refined.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of realised in myself that I was quite repressed, in that I was growing really, really fast, and that probably wasn't the life that was going to be mine forever.
Yeah, sure.
And, my way out was, I realised that the man that I had an affair with, he's very powerful, very, very educated, and very, very well respected. And that's what I was very attracted to. And so I guess it did. It ended my marriage, and then also propelled me forward. So I left there, and I was sort of seeing this kind of repertoire of behaviour that was happening in me, in that if I wanted something, I just work really hard and get it. So I wanted to leave there because my reputation was pretty sullied.
Yeah.
And I saw a job in sport, media and public relations in sport. So I thought, I think I'd really like to do that. No qualifications in public relations or marketing or media. So I applied for the job, and the agency that had it, the recruiter, said, no, you're not qualified. A week later, I phoned up and said, is that job still there? They said, yes, it is, but no. The week later, I kept on phoning. I was so persistent. I think it took me about 6 months before they gave in and said, okay, you can sit with the owner of the PR firm. So I did, and I got the job straight away. So that set me on a course for a few years in yacht racing here in Victoria and around Australia. And again, another remarkable time where at some stage I was the first female to report sport live to air on radio during the Melbourne to Devonport yacht race. And that was my first foray into radio, and I was addicted then, loved radio from that moment. And that was a really big job that involved every day of the week. You're out on boats, you're with yachties, it's hardcore.
Wow.
And after a few years, I burnt out. But I don't think it was so much burnout. It was just me being curious that I got a one-way ticket to Athens and left Australia just to travel around the world.
How old were you at this point?
I was 22.
Oh, that's young. You've done all this at 22.
Well, yeah, I look back now and I go, oh, wow, that's terrifying. I had a suitcase. There's no wheels on suitcases back then. I don't know how I got myself around the world. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, I did, and I saw lots of things, made friends. Didn't have any itinerary, just hopped from one country to another, and when I came back, I had met the father of my two children, my two older children, and he was still back at home, so I came home for that, and we moved in together, and then I didn't really plan on having children, but before long, Rose was on her way unexpectedly. So that's when I became, my whole world changed when I
Yeah.
became a mom.
How old were you when you first became a mum then?
I was 26 when she was born.
26. Yeah.
26, yeah,
You've done a
yeah.
lot until that point, though.
Well, it didn't feel, I mean, given that I'd left home so early, it was, I'd been out for a decade.
Mm.
So it,
Yeah.
um, and it was a certain time, and, I didn't, if, hadn't thought about having kids, probably didn't want them and repeat, what had happened with me. So, but I remember just feeling, a sense of joy, and I know when she was born, yeah, just I remember I was in the bed and she was next to me in that little plastic thing, and I turned and I felt for the first time in my entire life true love.
Yeah.
And I still refer to her, she's my first true love, because I felt something pop in my chest, and that was it. And
Did you want to be a mother before that happened? Before you
no,
got pregnant?
no.
No. Because I'm picturing you a very, even though I'm picturing you at this point like you're you're very confident, outgoing, driven, not giving up, not willing to stop. I can see why you're getting burnt out. You've said you said I think twice in all of that you grew up pretty fast. Before we come back to your children, why did you have to grow up pretty fast? Because I know childhood was pretty tough, and I know school wasn't easy as well. Is that where that came from, being tough and growing up so quickly?
Well, I had to. I was responsible for myself. I didn't have anyone else to take care of me. So,
Yeah. Join us tomorrow to hear more from today's incredible guests and learn valuable insights to help you lead your own way. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you then.